Good. Yeah. Took the... Hello, Alan. Good morning, everybody. I'm Kate Seeley with the Middle East Institute, and thank you all for joining us today for our discussion about Iran and the implications of the recent elections there on the political and strategic calculations of the Iranian leadership. We're going to look today at what the results mean inside of Iran and how they might impact Iran's approach to the upcoming nuclear negotiations with the P5+1, the U.S. and the European powers. There's been plenty of press about the immediate outcome of the elections. Clearly, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei consolidated his power with his loyalists winning about, 75% of the seats in parliament at the expense of Ahmadinejad, who has lost out. But what does this really mean as Iran heads into the 2013 presidential elections? What is the significance of this consolidation of power? And how does the mounting Western pressure on Iran over its nuclear program and concerns about an Israeli strike factor into all of this? Well, we're going to be addressing these questions today with two individuals who have long experience following Iran, Aliakbar Mousavi and Geneive Abdo. It's a great honor to welcome them both to MEI, but it's an especially great honor to have with us Mr. Mousavi, who really brings a very unique perspective to this discussion with his insight into Iran. He was a member of parliament, the 6th parliament from 2000 to 2004 under President Khatami, and in parliament he held several positions, including deputy of the Parliamentary Information, Communication and Technology Office, and secretary of the Tehran district. He was arrested in 2006 for his criticism of the regime and held in solitary confinement, and finally left the country in 2009 and came to the U.S., where he's joining us today. He's a visiting fellow at the University of Maryland and a digital freedom and human rights activist. Currently advises the International Campaign for Human Rights in Iran, an advocacy group based here in the U.S., and he was a visiting fellow in the Iranian Studies program at Stanford University. And I just want to say that in this mounting debate over Iran and what to do about Iran in Washington policy circles, we so rarely get a chance to hear from Iranians who have recently come out of the country and who understand the struggles and the battles that are going on inside. So today is really a very special opportunity for us to hear firsthand from someone who's going to shed some unique insight into the meaning of what's happening in Iran today. So thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Mousavi. Geneive Abdo is a familiar voice in Washington circles. She's been at the Century Foundation heading the Iran program, which is designed to shed light on the civil and political developments inside Iran itself. As part of that program, she's been bringing together Iranian journalists, academics, and civil society activists, bringing them together with high-ranking Europeans and Americans in Europe and Istanbul so that Europeans and Americans can have a better sense of what's happening inside that country. Geneive is also the creator and editor of the website InsideIran.org, which provides original reporting and analysis of what's happening in Iran. She was the Iran correspondent for The Guardian. She's also reported for the International Herald Tribune and The Economist, and has written 2 books, No God But God, Egypt and the Triumph of Islam, and Mecca and Main Street. And the other really great news that I want to announce today is that Geneive is bringing her Iran program to the Middle East Institute and will be a scholar here with us talking about Iran. And it's a development that is extremely exciting for MEI. It will increase our exposure and add a great deal of depth to the Institute. And we strongly believe that the work she does very much complements the mission of MEI, which is to increase American understanding of the Middle East. So today we're going to start with Mr. Mousavi, who will speak for 10 to 15 minutes, followed by Geneive. Mr. Mousavi is going to begin by showing a video, and so we'll be turning down the lights. And then after, we'll be opening the floor to questions. So please now join me in welcoming Mr. Mousavi.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to show you a very short video, which is my last speech in the parliament, in 6th parliament. As you know, we were in this parliament during Mr. Khatamei's presidencies and Mr. Karoubi as Speaker of the Parliament. And in this video, you can see that I criticized the Supreme Leader. That was the first time in the Parliament officially because of the election after this Parliament that he provided, and actually fraudulent election.
سید علیاکبر موسوی خمینی نماینده محترم تهران رئیس جمهوریت و اسلام شهر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. کلام خود را با بیانی از عهدنامه امیرالمومنین در نامه 53 معروف به عهدنامه مالکشتر آغاز می‌کنم که فرمود: از رسول خدا بارها شنیدم که فرمود پاک و آراسته نیست امتی که در آن ضعیف نتواند بدون لکنت زبان حق خود را از قوی دست بستاند. این جانب به عنوان نماینده و وکیل مردم تهران در دوره ششم مجلس شورای اسلامی بنا به سوگند خود در پیشگاه خدا و ملت و در راستای مسئولیت نمایندگی خویش وظیفه خود می‌دانم که در دفاع از حق بیش از 70% شهروندان تهرانی و حداقل 50% ایرانیان که در انتخابات فرمایشی اول اسفند ماه شرکت نکردند، بنا به آمار رسمی که چه بسا بیش از این نیز باشد، و از زبان اکثریت جنبش دانشجویی سرافراز ایران صدای اعتراض خاموش ملت در آن روز را از این تریبون رساتر ابراز دارم. اگر زمانی محمد علی شاه با حمایت لیاخوف روسی مجلس را به توپ بست و با امید بستن به برچیدن بساط مشروطه دوران استبداد صغیر را حاکم ساخت و اگر رضاخان با حمایت انگلیس راه بر ورود آزادیخواهان و حقجویان در انتخابات دوره هفتم مجلس شورای ملی بست، امروز نیز شاهد کودتای پارلمانی بر علیه جریان تحولخواه ایرانیان با ابزار رد صلاحیت و ارعاب در انتخابات دوره هفتم مجلس شورای اسلامی هستیم تا مجلس به هر ترفند مهرچینی گردد که به فرموده قیام و قعود کنند و دیگر از آن نامه اعتراض و انذار نگاشته نشود و صدای افشاگرانه حقیقت جویان بر نخیزد و کمیسیون اصل 90 آن ملجعی برای ستم کشیدگان نباشد و گزارش قتل‌های دگراندیشان، یورش نظامیان به کوی دانشگاه تهران، تبریز و ترشت، انفرادی‌ها و آزار روزنامه‌نگاران و زندانیان و فعالین سیاسی به خصوص دانشجویان و فعالین جنبش دانشجویی گوش حاکمان را نیازارد و کسی دیگر در مجلس سخنی از تنهایی زندان و انفرادی افرادی چون صابر، علیجانی، رحمانی، گنجی، زرفشان، آقاجری، اشکوری، عبدی، باطبی و سایر زندانیان مظلوم بر زبان نیاورد و آن کند که حاکمیت می‌خواهد و تنها آن گوید که حکومت می‌پسندد. جریان اقتدارگرا که در این سالها با وجود برخی سستی‌ها و فرصت‌سوزی‌های قابل نقد مجلس ششم باز هم دل خونی از این مجلس داشت، با تشکیل و راه اندازی دفاتر.
So what we want to show you are the crowds rushing to the stage. Is this
ضربه نهایی فراهم گردد. اما با این همه تنها کمتر از 30% مردم تهران و اکثر شهرهای بزرگ و حدود 50% کل واجد شرایط نظارت بر عملکرد ایشان اصلی ترین وظیفه ایشان میباشد. را فدای مصلحت حکومت خود کند.
اجازه بدید، اجازه بفرمایید آقا. اشکال نداره. ببینید داره یک وظیفه قانون اساسی خبرگان را میخونن. نه ببینید حالا از جایگاه قانونی خودشون اجازه بدید. یکی از اصول قانون اساسی که سریع اومد اگه همونو میخوندن دیگه نه. اجازه بفرمایید. اجازه بفرمایید. آقای موسوی
And you can explain what happened.
Mr. Mohammad Reza Khatami, the manager of the parliament at that time, actually managed the whole parliament at that time, and I could fortunately finish the whole speech, and he could control the parliament. So, if it's possible, can I take this? First of all, I would like to thank the Middle East Institute for inviting me to speak at this event. Also, I would like to send my Nowruz wishes to millions of people who celebrate this holiday around the world. I hope the people of Iran have a peaceful year in which they begin to overcome many of hardship they face. I have been asked to talk, first of all, to talk a little bit about my experience in the parliament. And I would like to first ask permission from the audience to talk about this. Despite the fact that in the Islamic Republic, 100% free elections have never taken place, without a doubt the sixth parliament, and like the first one, was independent from the ruling elites. The sixth parliament attempted to work toward realizing the people's demands for democracy, and it did not think twice about defending the rights of its critics. The sixth parliament was a shelter for the families of political prisoners and minorities, in contradiction to the following parliaments, which have unfortunately been formed just as formalities and hold little real influence. The will of the Supreme Leader comes before the will of the people, in a way that they even agreed to pass a law that would allow a representative to lose his job during his tenure. Many of the parliamentary members and the speakers of the sixth parliament, Mr. Karoubi, who is unjustly under house arrest today, were very brave. The podium of the parliament was feared by those who were trying to force their outdated thoughts on the people, not just in the parliament, but even the home of the Supreme Leader became a place for holding meetings and criticizing the performance of those who worked against the people. I was once personally responsible for criticizing the opposition faction in the presence of a group of parliamentary members. However, unfortunately, throughout the following parliaments, flattery, paying lip service, or just staying silent during the most key moments of our history became the norm, all the face of wrong decisions made by the ruling elites. The sixth parliament, with Khatami's assistance, did not allow the Supreme Leader to force the country into an economic blockade and threat of an imminent war. One of the examples of this letter from 135 members of the parliament to the Supreme Leader, in which a balanced approach was recommended regarding the nuclear case. However, silence and even the decision to blindly follow the decisions made by the ruling elites has created a hard and dangerous economic situation for our country. For the Sixth Parliament, in addition to human rights decisions, the topic of freedom of speech had highly priority, which was made possible with the help from Khamenei's Khatami's cabinet. For example, for the first time, and despite the opposition from the regime, the parliament recognized the necessity of creating fast internet broadband and the usage of satellite media. The parliament prioritized fighting with censorship on top of his agenda. However, today, the members of the sham parliament impose and tolerate worse types of censorship of the internet and social networks. Some of them create Facebook pages for their personal interests and at the same time silently witness the brutal attacks of police on people's homes for using satellite dishes. Now, how was the 9th parliamentary election held? During the question and answer session, I will also discuss a few practical suggestions in dealing with Iran. Before anything else, I should mention that the 9th parliamentary election was conducted without any government accountability in regards to the serious allegations of fraud following the 2009 presidential election. There are deep political and social wounds left from those elections. The parliamentary elections were conducted in conditions that lacked any international standards. The elections were not free, fair, or competitive. One of the obvious characteristics of these elections was the absence of main political faction in the country, the reformist camp and the supporters of the Green Movement, whose leaders are under house arrest and its activists in prisons. The regime had two main goals in mind and it achieved both. The first goal was manufacturing an acceptable election throughout in order to prove to the people and the international community that it still has its legitimacy. The second goal consisted of changing the composition of the parliament and its political makeup in order to prohibit Ahmadinejad's faction from gaining strength. And also the regime wanted to officially replace the reformist camp with the extreme faction. In manufacturing a high turnout, the regime showed that it no longer has any reservations. That it no longer has any reservations about its covert plans becoming apparent. Before the election, the regime used the media sources such as Kayhan and Fars News and announced that it predicts the possible election throughout of 65%. After the election, it announced the same number with only an eighth of a point difference, 64.2% as the actual percentage of voters. This way, according to them, they delivered a blow to the opposition. More evidence of the fraudulent election was when the Interior Minister rushed to announce the election results. He said in front of the television cameras that 20 million people voted, but the total number of eligible voters in Iran is 48 million people, he said before, which is a 54% voters throughout, not the official 64% voters turnout the government claimed. However, this is not the entire story. the number of the total eligible voters announced by the Iranian census was a part, which is a part of the Interior Ministry, is off by millions from what the Interior Minister announces. All these lies remind us of an Iranian idiom that says the liar has a bad memory. Another ridiculous story from this election was announcing the number of participants from provincial cities such as Ilam. After doing a simple addition and subtraction, it became apparent that the number announced is more than 100%. Some say apparently a large number of dead people in Ilam also participated. When the print media started to over this story, other large discrepancies in other cities became apparent. For the first time, instead of clarifying the issue, the Interior Ministry decided to completely erase the question. They entirely removed the separate number of voters for each city from their website. This way, the analysts and members of the media could not publish the details of this embarrassment. The permission was not given to local and international observers to monitor the election process, and the international reporters were forbidden to move freely within the country. A few reporters were taken to some water sorry. Since there is not much time, I would like to just refer you to many analysis about the discrepancies in the numbers announced and the process of the election published in respected media sources, such as a report published by BBC Persian on March 14th. Sorry. When it comes to the second goal, Khamenei has so far been successful in preventing Ahmadinejad's faction from gaining strength. By completely eliminating the reformist faction from the country's political sense, the Iranian Supreme Leader has interested an extremist political faction with leadership of Misbah Yazdi, a hardline cleric and a member of the Assembly of Experts, into the political arena in tandem with the traditional conservative camp. Khamenei is now trying to replace Haddad Adel, the former Speaker of the Parliament, and his relatives and his own relatives with Mr. Ali Larijani, the current Speaker. This way, he can guarantee the individuals chosen to be in the parliament be to his liking. Then, if necessary, and as promised before, he might even eliminate the presidency entirely. The parliament will then just choose the head of the executive branch without a direct vote from the people, which be a less of a headache for the Supreme Leader. Ahmadinejad has lost his power in the foreign policy, in the foreign policy making arena, and Mr. Khamenei may enter a dialogue with the international community over the nuclear issue from a position of power, relying on his own strategies and tactics. Khamenei's recent statements in Mashhad yesterday, in accordance with the Iranian New Year, did not indicate a shift in Iran's foreign policy, but it seemed to have a more cautionary tone. In conclusion, I would like to put forth two possible recommendations to deal with Iran, and then I will offer more suggestions in the question and answer period. First, I would like to discuss the necessity of weakening and eliminating the talk of war with Iran, talk which is coming from the United States and Israel, rather than spending billions on a war against Iran. International community should use their resources to support the struggle for human rights and freedom of speech and media freedom in Iran. This will be beneficial to the Iranian people and other countries in the world. I'm happy to hear that Mr. Obama paid attention to this fact in the most recent comments. I would like to remind everyone that an Iranian military commander a couple months ago said that actually Mr. Hajizadeh, the Air Force commander of IRGC, mentioned that our great wish is for Israel to attack Iran. This shows that the military security faction Iran needs a limited conflict for its continuous existence. 2. The 9th parliamentary election showed that without the presence of international election monitors and media, the Iranian government can no longer be trusted in conducting a free and fair election. The United Nations and its human rights rapporteur on Iran should work on creating the necessary mechanism to this end. Thank you for your patience.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much to the Middle East Institute and to Kate Seeley for organizing this event. And I'm very honored also to join the Institute in doing work on Iran. I thought I would give a brief presentation that would touch on 4 basic issues. One, to sort of give you an overall idea of the structure of the Iranian state and its relationship to decisions such as how Iran makes decisions on its nuclear program, and then to also give you a perspective both from the side of the European Union and also Israel and Iran as we approach the nuclear negotiations, which will happen in April. No date has been set, but as we know, the negotiations will happen in April. At least that's what all parties have agreed at this point. So as Mr. Mousavi explained, the Parliament obviously today is much different than the Parliament in which he was an MP during the Khatami period. And this is significant politically because as much as people, I think, in the United States tend to think of the political structure of Iran as very monolithic. You know, they talk about the mullahs in very derogatory terms. In fact, before now, or even before 2009, there was a political process in Iran where there was a lot of debate, as Mr. Mousavi pointed out. It was a very dynamic parliament, for example, and even as we saw as recently as 2009, during the nuclear negotiations in particular, you had nuclear negotiators sitting in Vienna signing off to agreements with the EU and the United States, and then those decisions being reversed in Tehran a few weeks later. So the reason I'm using these examples is that up until now, there actually was a debate within the regime over the nuclear issue, and I think that what this election shows us is not so much the lack of power in the parliament in regards to the nuclear negotiations, but what it shows us to some degree is more of a consensus within the regime. It shows the marginalization of reformists, of other factions that could have weighed in on such key issues as the nuclear program. And even Ahmadinejad himself. I mean, one of the reasons that there had been some promise in 2009 that there could be an agreement reached between Iran and what we call the P5+1 is that Ahmadinejad himself wanted an agreement on the nuclear issue, not because he was very fond of the United States or not because he necessarily wanted to normalize relations with the United States, but because he thought this would help him politically at home. And as we have seen since 2009, he has been in great trouble at home. He's lost popularity, and his faction, as Mr. Mousavi explained, has been marginalized. So this is the kind of conflict, this is the kind of give and take that we saw in the last series of nuclear talks that is highly unlikely to reoccur in the coming talks in Istanbul. And this is why following and understanding the political dynamic in Iran is so important to foreign policy issues facing the United States. I think that if we look even at the presidency of Mohammad Khatami, I think that the reason that we've reached this crisis is that if President Khatami were in power today, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We wouldn't be talking about a looming military attack. And this is certainly the view of most people, at least in the Israeli government. So what is sort of the view of the EU as we approach these nuclear talks in Istanbul? 2 weeks ago, I was in Berlin. I participated in a closed-door meeting of top EU officials as they tried to speak very candidly about what the options are with Iran. And I think that if at one time the European governments believed that the threat of a nuclear armed Iran was far more frightening for the United States than it was for those Europeans across the Atlantic, those days are in the past. And what struck me very much about this closed-door session was that European officials' views now are somewhere in the middle between America's caution and Israel's alarm. So the Europeans, to some degree now, are even more concerned about Iran's nuclear program than the United States. EU officials cited Iran's lack of transparency with the International Atomic Energy Agency as one reason that they believe Iran's enrichment should stop now. And they are using this not as a precondition for the talks that are going to happen in Istanbul, because so far the United States and the EU have announced that these talks will go forward without preconditions, but they have said that they will not be able to reach any sort of compromise with Iran if Iran does not stop enrichment, at least on a temporary basis. And as one diplomat said, if Iran does not agree to stop enrichment, we will end the diplomatic process. And this is very important because from the view of both the Europeans and the Obama administration, the diplomatic process is really the only thing preventing us at this moment from possibly a military attack on Iran. As you know, the Israelis feel much more of a threat than the Europeans or the United States for reasons I'll get to later. So we are at a very critical period now. Given this position, obviously, of even the Europeans that in the past Iran had relied upon to be, I guess, more compliant than the Americans, it seems that Iran must take these coming talks in a view them in a different perspective than they have in the past. As Secretary of State Clinton announced last week, this is Iran's last chance, and I think that there's some truth to that. Again, in this meeting of European policymakers, they also pointed to the election, the parliamentary election, as reasons to be pessimistic. Again, they view the elections, as does the United States and Israel, as telling us that the political elites around Khamenei, that his circle has narrowed, giving him much more power and also decreasing any sort of disagreement or real discussion there had existed within the regime in the past. Now, what is the view from Israel? As part of my trip a few weeks ago, I also went to Israel. I had high-level meetings with people in the Foreign Ministry, the National Security Council, and I think that I just wanted to point out, because obviously a lot of the Israeli position has been reported extensively in the media, particularly with Netanyahu's visit here a few weeks ago to Washington. But I think what I learned in these meetings that I think is very important is the great difference between the United States and the Israeli position. And that difference is that Israel, the United States, believes that Khamenei has not made the political decision to develop a bomb. And that's the argument that the Obama administration is using to sort of fend off a military attack, that the political decision has not been made. However, Israel believes that Iran must be stopped before it has enough stockpiles, enough nuclear fuel to produce a bomb. So this is the different sort of clocks in the way that the Israelis view the urgency of the situation and the way the Americans view it. So this is why the Israelis, for example, believe that now we're at a critical period, whereas the Obama administration is willing to wait to see if there's some evidence that Iran has decided, or that Khamenei in particular has decided to develop a nuclear weapon. I think there was an article, actually a column yesterday in the Wall Street Journal by Bret Stephens. I don't know if any of you read his columns. He's a very conservative commentator. But he accurately and very descriptively laid out Israel's position this way. He said that basically reports in the New York Times based on U.S. intelligence that Iran has not decided to produce a weapon, that whole argument is irrelevant. He said, this is what he wrote. He said, you may not be able to divine whether a drinker holding a Johnny Walker in one hand and a glass tinkling with ice in the other actually intends to pour himself a drink. And perhaps he doesn't. But the important thing, at least when it comes to intervention, is not to present him with the opportunity in the first place. And then he wrote, the serious question policymakers must answer isn't whether Iran will go for a bomb once it is within a half step of getting one. It's whether Iran should be allowed to get to that half step. This is Israel's position as it was explained to me in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Now, what is the view from Iran? I think, as I said, there is a lot of pessimism about whether there will be any sort of movement in the upcoming nuclear negotiations for a couple of reasons. Iran believes it has already made many compromises with the United States and the EU in terms of being more transparent about its nuclear program. It also believes that there hasn't been enough of a recognition by the West about the state, the legitimacy of the state. The Iranian government has always felt that these talks are simply an opportunity to humiliate the Islamic Republic. And I think that neither the United States nor the EU have addressed these fundamental issues. And I'll just give you a few examples of how Iran believes that it has made progress and made compromises over the last few years to meet the demands of the West. Iran, first of all, allowed IAEA inspectors into the country to inspect its centrifuge production. It agreed to stop enrichment beyond 20% if the West provided fuel for its Tehran research reactor. And the third gesture Iran believes that it has made since 2009, which was the last series of talks, was in releasing the American hikers. And I think that just in the last few weeks, the arrest of a former serviceman, Mr. Hekmati, they announced he had been sentenced to, he had been given a death sentence, but it was announced that the likelihood now is that he will not be sentenced to death. And I think that we could view that as another gesture by the Iranians as we approach these talks. So Iran believes that it has made these concessions. And from the view of Tehran, what has it received in return? It's received the toughest economic sanctions in its 33-year history with the United States. It's received sanctions against individuals, both by the EU and the U.S., deemed to be human rights violators. 2 sets of sanctions from the EU and the U.S. have been directed specifically at individuals within the regime. Iran is also now facing an oil embargo to take effect July 1st, banning countries from buying Iranian oil. So the way Iran sees it, it is now under more pressure than North Korea, which withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and has even tested atomic weapons. I think that we can assume that the sanctions regime will not change Iran's nuclear calculus. Since all this pressure started in 2006, if you look at Iran's response in terms of its nuclear program, it has only marched further toward weaponization and moved the different bars that the United States and the EU have set. For example, the number of centrifuges has increased 8 times. Iran is now enriching uranium at 20%, something the West said it would never tolerate 2 years ago. In addition, it now has 2 enrichment facilities, not 1. So how do we avert war, given all this sort of pessimism? I think that of all the proposals that have been circulated over these last several weeks, there is one recommendation that's been suggested that I think is more realistic. And that is to allow Iran to continue to enrich uranium. Now, the West has said they won't tolerate this, but we'll see what happens in Istanbul, under the NPT in exchange for full transparency by the IAEA. This means allowing inspectors into the country, not hiding facilities, giving them free access. And the other part of this package would be to have the U.S. and Iran negotiate a separate settlement independent of the nuclear issue, which would address many of Iran's former grievances of the past since the revolution, which also include unfreezing Iran's assets. Some of you might know that the United States has frozen Iran's assets since the taking of the American hostages, and this has been a long-standing demand of Iran. So I think that this could be one proposal that might try to de-escalate the conflict and avert any sort of possible military attack. But we'll see what happens when the talks are held in Istanbul. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Geneive, why don't you remain here? And Aliakbar, please come to the front. I want to thank you both for those insights. There's a lot to discuss here, from the future of the reform movement to the question of the talks in Vienna. And the future of the nuclear program. I think that I'm going to start by just opening the floor, and then I'll jump in with some comments later. Let's have Tom Lippman, and if you could just identify who you're with, please.
Does Reza can help us?
Yes.
My name is Tom Lippman. I'm an adjunct scholar here at the Middle East Institute. My field of interest is Saudi Arabia, the other side of the Gulf. But I want to ask Mr. Mousavi, the political process, or reversal of political process that you have described, how would you estimate the response, the reaction of the citizens of Iran, the people of Iran, to the developments that you have described and to the undermining of a fundamental building block of the Islamic Republic's constitution?
Mr. Mousavi may answer in
فکر کنم که میتونم شما ترجمه کنم. talking in Farsi maybe is better. فکر کنم که مردم ایران در واقع توی شرایطی از نظر امنیتی و سکیوریتی هستن که امکان آزادی عمل، واکنش و همدیگر رو پیدا کردن و mobilize شدن رو در واقع ندارن.
I believe the Iranian people are facing a hard security and oppressive situation. They're having a very hard time connecting with each other, mobilizing, and actually being able to freely express what their demands are.
مسئله دوم اینه که از نظر اقتصادی به شدت گرفتار هستن و صبح تا شب سعی میکنن در واقع زندگی عادی و روزمره خودشون رو به اصطلاح بگذرونن. خیلی سخت شده زندگی اقتصادیشون.
The second issue is the economic situation, and the Iranian people are incredibly busy trying to deal with the day-to-day economic issues that they are forced to tolerate.
به خاطر همین امکان این که اصلا بتونن وقت پیدا کنن یک به اصطلاح خودشون رو جمع جور بکنن، واکنش یعنی وقت صرف کنن توی مسائل سیاسی خیلی سخت شده و همینطور نمیتونن خودشون رو موبیلایز کنن.
So it has become very hard to find the time or the opportunity to actually spend time calculating ways to get together and mobilize.
ولی قطعاً در یک فرصتی و موقعیتی که براشون فراهم بشه و این امکان به وجود بیاد که خودشون رو جمع کنن، یعنی ارگانایز بتونن بکنن، من فکر کنم در یک موقعیت‌های خاصی میشه انتظار داشت باش واکنش نشون بدن مثل سال 2009.
But certainly if the opportunity is provided, and as we saw in 2009 during special times, the Iranian public definitely do react if the time is correct.
به خاطر همین ما تاکید داریم روی مسئله اینکه باید از خارج کشور تسهیلاتی فراهم کنیم، کمک بکنیم که صدای مردم و اینکه بتونن همدیگه رو پیدا کنن و با هم ارتباط برقرار کنن. بحث اینترنت فریدم و اینجور مسائل.
That's why I emphasize the fact that as individuals who are living outside of the country, mechanism and facilities have to be provided for people inside the country to express their thoughts and concerns freely.
Muhammad Achigzai from Voice of America, Pashto Service. Is there any theoretical differences between Khamenei and Ahmadinejad, or just political? I just want to know.
من فکر کنم تفاوت اساسی در واقع بینشون وجود داره یا حداقل اینه که در طی این پروسه 4 ساله به وجود اومده.
I believe a fundamental difference it does exist between the two, or at least it has been created during the past 4 years.
یه مقدارم این حمایت تام و تمام و ویژه آقای خامنه‌ای در انتخاب شدن دوم ایشون، اینکه هزینه زیادی برای این کار انجام داد احمدی‌نژاد بیاد سر کار، آقای احمدی‌نژاد رو یه مقدار امر برش مشتبه کرد، یعنی به اشتباه انداخته، خودش رو دیگه خیلی بزرگ فرض کرد.
The complete support and the other support that Khamenei provided for Ahmadinejad and his re-election in 2009 mistakenly impacted Ahmadinejad in thinking that he has full support from Khamenei and his camp.
و همینطور اون طیف سکولاری که به عنوان رأس رهبریش دست معاون ایشون هست آقای مشایی، اونها هم خیلی فعال شدن، طیفی که آقای خامنه‌ای به هیچ عنوان حاضر نیست اونا رو اجازه بده رشد بکنن، مثل اصلاح طلبها.
And of course there's another faction which is led by Ahmadinejad's advisor, Mr. Mashai, which is a secular nationalistic faction, and Mr. Khamenei, just like the reformist camp, is not willing to tolerate that.
به خاطر همین آقای خامنه‌ای در اولین فرصت در انتخابات اخیر سعی کرد آقای احمدی‌نژاد رو عملاً بنشینه سر جاش، یه گوشه‌ای بالاخره یک گروهی باشه در حد معمول توی قدرت، نه اینکه بخواد جلوی رهبری شاخش کنه.
This is why Mr. Khamenei put in a way Ahmadinejad and his camp in its place. He's willing to tolerate them as just like any other small, uninfluential camp that exists under his umbrella, but he's not willing to tolerate anything more.
ولی خب روحیه شخصی آقای احمدی‌نژاد از دوره دانشجوییش که ما داریم مثلا بررسی می‌کنیم نشون میده که ایشون اهل درگیری و اینهاست و این چالش ادامه خواهد داشت.
But having known Mr. Ahmadinejad and his activities even since his student days, it is very unlikely for Mr. Ahmadinejad to be quiet, and he's going to, kind of act and react to the situation.
We've got 2 questions from Barbara Slavin of the Atlantic Council in the overflow room, one for Mr. Mousavi, one for Geneive. I'll begin with Geneive's. Why are you so sure sanctions will not change Khamenei's calculus on the nuclear program? And for Mr. Mousavi, how will the U.S. be able to promote internet freedom given all the obstacles created by banking and other sanctions?
I think there's a lot of wishful thinking that the sanctions will change Khamenei's calculus. I mean, certainly, no one wants any sort of war with Iran. I just think that short of complete economic collapse, the situation of sort of economic deterioration can go on for a long time. And there hasn't, even though we've seen a currency crisis. The economic crises are numerous at this point. We even as the Iranians celebrate Nowruz now, there are fewer people traveling outside the country for the holiday for the first time in many, many years. Thousands used to travel to Turkey, but people don't have any money now, so they're not even traveling for the New Year. So there are many, many signs of the depth of the economic crisis. But I don't think at the end of the day, unless the crisis deepens far beyond what it is now, that that's going to be force Khamenei to take this drastic step of making the kind of compromises that the U.S. and the EU are demanding. So I think that as we sit here today, or as all parties participate in the talks in Istanbul, we're not there yet. There isn't enough pressure now, I think, that will change at least the calculation in the near future.
Very briefly, Barbara.
Yeah. We're not talking about Khamenei capitulating. We're talking about a win-win sort of solution where he, for example, accepts caps on enrichment, say, at 5%, and in return gets fuel for the research reactor. I mean, I think
but there's no proposal on the table now for a cap at 5%.
We don't know we don't know what the P5+1 is going to come up with. That's all I'm suggesting is that while it may be wishful thinking,
right.
You just propose that in your recommendations. Anyway, I just want to play devil's advocate on that. Thanks.
Okay, we'll have the question about how promoting internet freedom given the obstacles.
I think that financial transaction is not a big deal for internet freedom. And actually, I think since 2009 until now, Obama's administration did a very good job about this issue and also human rights issues in his administration. And as he promised yesterday, Nowruz message to Iranian people, I think that he will focus and continue his job about in this regard, in internet and media, giving license to OFAC, general license to export software and hardware to Iran is really important. As you know, and you are familiar with the process of OFAC, it takes too long to get even a small license. It's a very big issue right now, even though they did something about that. But right now, for example, about the hardware of the satellite, the American company cannot export, and they don't have permission, and they have to apply each by each to OFAC, and they get the license. It takes a long time. So, and also the other things, the necessary issue is that bringing European country to join U.S. in this issue, and it's really important because Iranian government always tries to manipulate these American activities, any activities, to use it and push people, say that you are the friends of and you are a part of CIA and everything, as you know. But in European country, also small countries that they are not sensitive in Iran, it can be very helpful joining to American government in this regard.
Ibrahim Awais from Georgetown University. I agree that there is a decision of the United States and Israel not to attack Iran at this time, in addition to the reasons why you mentioned, because of the drastic consequences if a war of this type would be launched, and this would include probably wiping out Israel from the map. What I wanted to say here in this regard, that this atomic bomb of Iran was only created by Israel to divert the attention of the world from the Palestinian problem. Who now hears about the Palestinian problem? It is gone. And the main reason for this is that it is launched by Israel, the mass media. It is exactly the same way that...
Could we have a question, please, with all due respect?
The same thing as the weapons of mass destruction. So do you agree with me that it was launched by Israel and bought by the United States in order to avoid finding a solution to the Palestinian problem?
Who would like to take the question?
I don't think I can speak to the motivations of the Israeli or the U.S. government, but I mean, it's obvious that there's far more focus on the Iranian issue now in Israel, and I think that just from being there a few weeks ago, it's hard for us to imagine sitting here in Washington, but both the people in government as well as the population believe that this is a very serious threat, one that that becomes more, I guess, imminent as time goes on. So I think it's difficult for us to know that sitting here, but that is at least the perspective from Israel. Thank you.
A very interesting question from the overflow room from Mr. Mousavi about this issue. Do you think Iran should continue its nuclear program? Should Iran pursue nuclear weapons? How do you think the rest of the reformists feel about this issue, the Iranian population feel about the rest of this issue? How would Iran's work on its nuclear program change if a reformist government was in place?
Actually, I'm not the reformist speaker, but I can talk about just my opinion about this issue. As I talked before, our view about the nuclear issues is the same as that we issued a letter to Supreme Leader in the 6th Parliament by signing more than, I think, about 135 person, which caused disqualification by Guardian Council for the next election. Just the first reason that they disqualified us was about this letter. The main statement of this letter was that we should join and talk to can I get Reza's help. ما باید در واقع با جامعه بین‌المللی تلاش بکنیم اعتماد اونها رو به دست بیاریم. به خاطر اعتماد سازی میتونیم مدتی این مسئله غنی‌سازی رو متوقف کنیم. همه بدونن که ما داریم چی کار میکنیم. با اعتماد کامل با دنیا توی این پروژه پیش بریم.
We have to approach the West and Western countries in order to build trust. And the decision should be made to stop enrichment for a while in order to get to that objective and to that goal, in order to show that we are not after anything dangerous. And that way, with the international community support, we can move forward with the country's nuclear program.
خب در دوره‌های خاتمی این موقت متوقف هم شد به خاطر اینکه اعتماد سازی بشه و کاملا فعالیت‌ها در واقع شفاف صورت بگیره، چون اساساً مسئله پروژه اتمی یه چیزی بود که از زمان شاه در واقع شروع شده بود و اون راکتور کوچیک توسط آمریکا در واقع ساخته شده بود. این یک پروژه کاملا مشخصی بود، اون رو میشد با اعتماد سازی راجبش فعالیت کرد.
As you're all aware, this decision was made during Khatami's time to actually stop enrichment, and this was the reason that that decision was made. Iran's nuclear program is a long program. It goes all the way back to Shah's time, and it kind of changes with the different political environments in the country.
اون راکتوری که الان در واقع در ایران هست با همکاری خود آمریکا در واقع شروع شده بود و
the reactor that actually exists in the country now was put there with America's participation and help back in the day.
ما به هیچ عنوان این رو صلاح نمی‌دونستیم که کشور رو با یک مخاطره بزرگ، محاصره اقتصادی بزرگ روبرو کنیم.
We didn't find it beneficial to endanger the country economically and security-wise in order to move forward and push with the nuclear
فکر
program.
می‌کنیم با اعتماد سازی میتونیم حتی اون کلیت چیزی که دنیا در آژانس اتمی به رسمیت شناخته حق غنیسازی صلح‌آمیز اورانیوم برای مصارف صلح‌آمیز این رو که به رسمیت شناخته بود رو این رو تضمین هم بکنیم ولی دنیا از ما نگران نباشه که در این رابطه اتفاقی در واقع میخواد بیفته.
We also believe that by doing that we could gain the international community's trust and the IAEA and what is allowed under the NPT, the Iranian right to actually pursue a peaceful nuclear program. We could actually by playing, friendly to the world community, actually guarantee that and move forward peacefully.
و این نظر شخصی من همین الان هم که اون نامه رو امضا کرده بودم الانم برای این نظرم که بایستی برای اعتماد سازی این رو متوقف کرد و با دنیا به صورت شفاف پیش رفت که ما هدف نظامی تو این زمینه نداریم.
As a signatory of that letter, still to this day, as I'm standing in front of you, I believe the same, that enrichment should be stopped in order to achieve the world community's trust. Then we can, from that point on, move forward with our ambitions.
Russell Michelov, no current institutional affiliation. You mentioned, based upon your conversations in Europe a few weeks ago, that the level of concern there is higher than here. And I'm just wondering why. What is it about the stance of the administration here that the Europeans fault?
Well, let me put it this way. I guess I need to be more precise. I wouldn't necessarily say that the concern is greater there, but I think that the Europeans now are much more willing to take tougher action against Iran than the Obama administration. Basically for the lack of sort of domestic political considerations that there are in the United States. I think that, obviously President Obama is running for re-election. He's in a tough spot right now. There are a lot of competing debates in this country about Iran. The Europeans don't have those kind of pressure points. I think Chancellor Merkel, for example, has taken a very hard line on Iran. Sarkozy has taken a very hard line on Iran. And so it's not, I think that the concern is, there is concern, and I think that another factor that has contributed to some of the EU member states' impatience and now lack of tolerance is that they were actually participating in these talks recently and in 2009. And as someone said in this meeting I attended in Berlin, we're not going to tolerate the Iranians coming day after day with their same proposal that we rejected the day before. And we're not going to tolerate all their negotiating strategies that are just intended to buy time, used as stalling tactics. We've seen that movie before. That's sort of the attitude. So I think that it's a lot of things. It's the lack of sort of the domestic political pressures that Obama faces now that don't exist in Europe, and it's also the Europeans' recent experience negotiating with Iranian negotiators.
Question in the back here.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Sabag. I'm a former intern at the Middle East Institute, and I'm glad to be back. I want to ask you something about the legitimacy of the regime as it is perceived within Iran. We spent a lot of time talking about how Iran, in a sense, perhaps feels threatened given its regional context and therefore is very adamant in maintaining its ambiguity over enrichment precisely because it does not want to, be perceived within Iran as being weak and giving into the West terms and demands on its program. So my question is, is really the threat to Iran the legitimacy that the regime is now facing as it manufactures elections to its liking and perhaps becomes less democratic in its decision making as the Ayatollah Khamenei reduces his inner circle?
ببینید دولت ایران یک استراتژی داره که این رو رسما هم اعلام کرده.
The Iranian regime has a strategy that it has even officially announced it.
من خیلی دقت کردم در صحبت‌های دیروز آقای خامنه‌ای در مشهد که معمولاً در روز اول سال نو در مشهد صحبت میکنه، یک جورایی ربط به استراتژی اون سال هم پیدا میکنه.
I paid close attention to Mr. Khamenei's statements yesterday in Mashhad in accordance with the Nowruz celebration, and in a way his speech projects also Iran's foreign policy and domestic policy for the upcoming year.
من احساس کردم تا الان، یعنی تا دیروز که ایشون صحبت میکرد، به رغم اینکه موفقیتی حاصل کرده در کنترل مجلس به اون شکلی که میخواست.
My feeling was that up until this point, as of yesterday, despite the fact that he has been able to establish his domain and his power over the regime by his successes in the parliamentary elections.
و به نظر میاد اون استراتژی در صحبت ایشون تغییری درش حاصل نشده هنوز.
It didn't seem that the overall strategy of the government, domestic or foreign policy, has changed that much.
اما اون استراتژی چیه که قبلا اعلام کردن؟
But what is the strategy?
میگن ما چندین مشکل با جامعه بین‌المللی داریم، از جمله با آمریکا و کشورهای غربی.
They say that we have a lot of problems or a few problems with the international community, including the United States.
یکیش مسئله اتمی هست فقط.
One of the issues, and only one of the issues, is the nuclear program.
چندین مشکل دیگه هم با ما دارن، از جمله راجع به حقوق بشر، راجع به مسائل صلح خاورمیانه.
There are many other issues like the human rights situation and the West's approach to
راجع به
it.
تروریسم.
Security issues in the region as a whole, terrorism.
بهترین جایی که اونا فکر میکنن یک حداقل حامی در درون مردم که حالا ربط داره به بحث هم لجیتیمسی که شما اشاره کردید، مسئله اتمی هست.
When it comes to all these problems, they feel like the minimum support that they have among all these issues is actually on the nuclear issue when it comes to domestic support.
میگن اگه از این قسمت عقب نشینی کنیم، قطعاً این تمام کار نخواهد بود با دنیا و اونا به اصطلاح موو میکنن به سمت پروژه‌های دیگه، مخصوصا مسئله حقوق بشر که همین الکشن آزاد و نمیدونم انواع اقسام مسائل هست که دیگه اصلا یعنی موجودیتشون رو
They believe that if they back away from that point, that's not going to be the only issue. The West is going to then move forward with the other projects, such as establishing human rights in the country, trying to demand free and fair elections, and those issues, if they're resolved, it's going to change the nature of the regime as a whole.
مشروعیتشون به شدت سقوط کرده، به خصوص بعد از انتخابات ریاست جمهوری قبلی.
Their legitimacy has drastically been reduced, especially
بین
since
مردم،
the
بین مذهبیون.
presidential elections of 2009 among the people, among the religious individuals.
و حتی کشورهای عربی و اسلامی که قبلا خیلی راحتی ازشون حمایت میکردن، این افت کرده.
And even the support among the Arab and Islamic countries in the world has drastically been reduced.
خلاصش این ضرب المثل فارسیه و اونها اینو تکرار هم کردن.
It again reminds me of an Persian idiom, and they've said it as well.
میگن اگه الف گفتی باید تا ی بری.
If you've said A, you have to carry it all the way until Z.
میگن اگه تو پروژه اتمی عقب نشینی کنیم که یه حمایتکی از طرف مردم، یه جایی کشورهای اسلامی نداریم، عقب نشینی کنیم تا اون آخرش که دیگه اصلا موجودیت خودمون، حقوق بشر وقتی اونا بخوان رعایت بکنن، یعنی که موجودیت این سیستم، انتخابات آزاد، مسائل مختلف.
So what that means is that if we compromise on A, which is the nuclear issue, then we're going to have to worry about all the issues in between until Z, which is actually, you know, the legitimacy and the existence of our regime.
پس تو همون استیج اول خوب وایستیم.
So let's stay strong in the first stage.
فعلا تاکتیکا عوض شده، میخوان مذاکره کنن، بیایید برید، حالا هیچ صحبت اینجوری، ولی باید دید این فشارها طی ماه‌های آینده آیا ایران رو از نظر تغییر استراتژی هم وادار میکنه یا نه.
So that hasn't changed at all. They say that, oh, let's negotiate, let's do this, let's have a meeting here, let's have a meeting there, but there are no signs that show us that the strategy as a whole has changed at all.
ولی ممکنه در آینده به هر حال تحت یه سری شرایط جدید و فشارها و مشکلات دیگه بخوان.
But it's possible. There are other factors, you know, sanction, international pressures. Who knows how that's going to change the strategy.
just want to jump in with a quick question. You talked about Iran's foreign policy, Iran's declining legitimacy. We saw a resurgent Iran after the Iraq War in the Middle East, but now one of Iran's closest allies, Syria, hangs in the balance. We're not sure which way Syria is going to fall, but it's possible that Iran might lose Syria as a strategic ally. Just curious to hear your insight into what sort of ripple effect that might have on Iran's strategy and calculations in the region if it loses Syria. What kind of impact will it have on its other policies? And what would be the implications for the rest of Iran's foreign policy in the Arab world?
ببین در مرحله اول که ایران تلاش خواهد کرد تا میتونه حتی جلوتر از روسیه، جلوتر از سوریه، چین به اصطلاح مقاومت بکنه چون این دژ بسیار مهمیه براش.
Iran will do its best to even move ahead of Russia or China in supporting Syria and the Syrian regime because it's a very important strategic issue for its foreign policy.
ولی اگه یه دفعه ببینه که بشار اسد دیگه رفتنیه، اونجوری که مثلا دیروز از لحن روسا تغییر لحنشون معلومه، یواش یواش دارن تغییر میدن لحنشون رو.
For whatever reason, if Iran decides that Bashar is no longer is going to be in power and it's finished, as we somewhat witnessed from the tone of the Russians yesterday.
و ببینن که دیگه این حتمی هست، ممکنه از رو اصل خود به اصطلاح حمایت از حکومت بشار اسد یا حداقل شخص بشار اسد دست بردارن و ولی بیان در استیج بعدی قطعا سنگر میگیرن.
So they might change their policy as far as supporting Bashar himself is concerned, and they might back away a little bit and see what will happen.
با توجه به اینکه می‌بینید در عرب اسپرینگ بعد از اینکه انتخابات داره برگزار میشه اکثرا نیروهای اسلامگرا دارن برنده میشن. اگه بتونه یعنی تلاش خواهد کرد که اون جمعیتی که خیلی تندروتر دید تندتر به اصطلاح غرب داره اونها رو حمایت بکنه، یعنی از حمایت کردن از این حمایتایی که الان داره میکنه از خود حکومت بشار اسد سویچ کنه به سمت حمایت از اون طیف تندرو که حداقل در آینده سوریه اونها بیشتر قدرت بگیرن.
For example, as we saw that after the Arab Spring or following Arab Spring, there are a lot of Islamist factions in the Middle East in various countries that are gaining support. They might win elections here and there. So Iranians can easily switch their focus on trying to get the support of the more radical and extremist factions within these Islamic groups while they're waiting for the Syrian issue to play out, and they can easily do that.
ولی دیگه به هر حال اون نقطه خانه خلوت قبلی رو دیگه ایران نخواهد داشت و ضربه بزرگی خواهد بود، اما تمام کار نیست.
But of course it's going to be a harsh blow to Iran. It's not going to have Syria as its backyard as it used to be in the past. So it'll be a harsh blow no matter what, but it's going to have to play it out.
All right, well, we've just scratched the surface here. I think, well, we'll take one last question, if it's a brief question, and then we have to wrap it up.
I'm James Amy, formerly with the State Department. I'd like to ask Ms. Abdo, if your analysis of the administration's view about Iranian nuclear capability is correct, then it seems that that the U.S. would be prepared to accept the kind of solution that you've suggested. That is, no limit on enrichment, but everything controlled by the UN. What do you think the chances of Iran accepting that are?
Wow, that's difficult. I don't think I can answer that. I don't know that anyone can answer that question. I think that it will. I think the idea of the sort of proposal that I mentioned at the end. I think the intent of that kind of package to present to Iran would be one that offers Iran incentives, because I think until now the United States and the EU have just asked Iran to do things it doesn't want to do, right? Stop and search. And there hasn't been to date any incentives offered Iran that are important to the Iranians. So I guess that's why I think that a package that would offer Iran or meet some of the demands that the Iranians have been asking for many years would go a long way toward inspiring the regime to compromise on issues that it has said it will never compromise on, such as enrichment. So I guess that's the way I'd like to answer that. I mean, of course, people in the Obama administration are studying various proposals and, have been doing this for many years. I mean, since President Obama came into office, obviously he's pursued a policy that is sort of sanctions on the one hand, diplomacy on the other. This dual-track approach hasn't worked out so well. So, obviously they're looking for other options. But I think that certainly there are people in the administration, there are people who have recently left that in 2003 were able to gain Iranian cooperation by offering incentives. So I hope that that lesson was learned and possibly could be repeated.
Great. Well, clearly there's much to be covered, much more to discuss today. We've just scratched the surface, but I invite you all to come up and speak to our speakers after this. And in the meantime, please join me in thanking Geneive, Mr. Mousavi, and the wonderful translator. Thank you very much. No, it's great. I know. Only get better and better.
همچین شما